Chicago in November wasn't kind to dreamers. The wind sliced through layers like it had a personal grudge, and the sidewalk shimmered with that greasy mix of rain and leftover street salt. Inside. The Grand Oak, though, the world felt softer, warmer even. Rich wood paneling, low amber lighting, the gentle clink of ice in crystal glasses, and always the piano. Not just any piano. A gleaming black Steinway grand that sat like a silent monarch in the corner. Waiting. She moved through the room with quiet efficiency, balancing a tray of dirty martini glasses in one hand and a fresh round of old fashions in the other. Her black flats barely made a sound on the thick carpet. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a white apron, was neat but worn at the cuffs. She'd stitched the hem twice already. At 28, she carried herself with the careful posture of someone used to making herself small, to not taking up too much space. But if you looked closely, especially when she thought no one was watching, you'd see it. The way her eyes lingered on the piano keys, just for a second too long. Like she was remembering something precious she'd misplaced. She hadn't touched a piano in over 5 years. Not really. Not since she'd walked out of Juilliard's practice rooms for the last time. Her suitcase lighter than when she'd arrived, her heart heavier than she thought possible. Back then, music hadn't just been her passion. It had been her language, her breath, the way she made sense of joy and sorrow and everything in between. She'd played Chopin like she was whispering secrets and her own compositions. Fragile, searching things, had drawn quiet praise from professors who rarely handed out compliments. But life, as it often does, had other plans. A phone call in the middle of a theory exam. Her mother's voice, thin and scared, saying the words no one wants to hear. It's serious. Cancer, aggressive. Treatment costs that ballooned faster than hope. Student loans were one thing. Watching your parent choose between rent and radiation was another. So she'd packed her sheet music, sold her decent second-hand keyboard, and came home. Not to give up, she told herself. Just to pause. Just until things settled. They never really settled. Her mother fought hard, but the fight drained everything: savings, energy, time. After she passed, the debt remained, a cold, heavy stone in the center of her life. Music felt like a luxury she couldn't justify, a language she no longer had the right to speak. The piano became a ghost in the room of her old life, beautiful but untouchable. Now she worked. Double shifts most days, sometimes triples on weekends. The Grand Oak paid better than most places. And the tips could be decent if you knew how to read the room. The quiet businessman nursing a scotch, the nervous first date needing reassurance, the group of friends celebrating a promotion. She'd learned to be invisible when needed, present when asked, and always professional. She remembered drink orders, birthdays, the name of a regular's dog. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on and the creditors at bay. Barely. The piano at the Grand Oak was usually played by a hired musician, a pleasant older man named Mr. Henderson, who knew exactly what the crowd wanted. Smooth jazz standards, a little Gershwin, maybe a recognizable Beatles tune done softly. He was good, reliable, and never drew too much attention to himself. That was the unspoken rule of the place. Ambiance, not spectacle. The music was there to fill the silences, not to demand them. She'd glance at the piano sometimes while wiping down a nearby table, her fingers twitching slightly against the damp cloth. Once, during a rare lull on a slow Tuesday afternoon, she'd even sat down when the place was empty, just to feel the cool ivory under her fingertips again. She'd played a single scale, softly, just to hear the sound resonate in the quiet room. It felt like touching an old scar, familiar, a little tender, but not painful. Then she'd heard the back door open, jumped up like she'd been caught stealing, and hurried back to the kitchen, her face burning. The memory still made her wince. Her apartment was a studio on the 3rd floor of a building that groaned in the wind. It smelled faintly of damp plaster and the lavender sachets she tucked into drawers to mask it. The only decoration was a framed photo on the nightstand, her and her mom, smiling on a beach years ago, both of them squinting into the sun, looking carefree in a way that felt like someone else's life. She kept her old sheet music in a sealed plastic bin under the bed, along with a few concert programs from her student days. She never opened it. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid of what she might feel. Regret, longing, the sharp sting of what could have been. It was easier to keep it buried. Her routine was a well-worn groove. Up at 5:30 a.m., quick shower, strong coffee brewed in a dented pot. Check the bills stacked neatly on the small kitchen counter. Electricity, water, the ever-present student loan statement that never seemed to shrink. Out the door by 6:15, walking fast against the wind to catch the bus. First shift at a small cafe downtown until 2 p.m., serving pastries and refilling coffee for harried office workers. A quick sandwich on a park bench if the weather allowed, otherwise huddled in a doorway. Then the walk across town to the Grand Oak, changing into her uniform in the tiny staff bathroom, smoothing her hair, taking a deep breath before pushing through the heavy velvet curtain into the bar's warm, dim glow. Evenings at the Grand Oak blurred together in a rhythm of trays, orders, and polite smiles. She learned to read the subtle shifts in the room, the way a table's energy changed when the wine arrived, the slight tension before a proposal, the comfortable silence of old friends. She prided herself on being good at her job, on being someone people felt at ease with. It wasn't the life she'd imagined at 18, practicing scales until her fingers ached, dreaming of concert halls, but it was honest work. It kept her afloat. Tonight was busier than usual. A light rain had started, driving more people indoors, seeking warmth and distraction. The low hum of conversation mixed with the soft clatter of dishes and Mr. Henderson's gentle rendition of Autumn Leaves. She navigated the tables with practiced ease, refilling water glasses, clearing empty plates, offering a quiet "everything all right?" with a genuine smile. Her feet ached in her sensible black shoes, and a dull headache was starting behind her eyes from the constant low-level stress of keeping everything running smoothly. But she pushed it down. Complaining wasn't an option. Rest wasn't an option. Not yet. As she passed the piano on her way to the kitchen with a stack of empty dessert plates, her gaze drifted to the keys again. Mr. Henderson was taking a break, sipping tea at the bar. The piano sat empty, waiting. For a fleeting second, she imagined sitting there, not playing anything fancy, just feeling the keys again, remembering the weight of a chord, the vibration traveling up her arms. It was a silly, selfish thought. She shook her head slightly as if to dislodge it and kept walking. The plates in her hands were real. The rent due next week was real. The piano was just furniture. Beautiful furniture, but furniture nonetheless. She didn't notice the new group that had been seated in the private alcove near the back. They'd arrived just before the rain picked up, ushered in by the manager with extra deference. Important clients, she assumed. Probably another corporate dinner. She'd serve them like any other table, efficiently, unobtrusively. She made a mental note to check on them soon, but first, she needed to drop off these plates and grab the espresso order for table 7. The kitchen was its usual controlled chaos, sizzling pans, shouted orders, the sharp smell of garlic and seared meat. She handed off the plates to the dishwasher, grabbed the small tray with the espresso cups, and turned back toward the dining room. As she walked, she caught a glimpse of the private alcove. A man sat at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair, listening intently to one of his companions. He looked different. Not just expensive suit different, though the cut of his jacket screamed money. It was the way he held himself, like the room, the city, maybe the whole world, existed just slightly for his convenience. There was an intensity in his eyes, even from across the room, a kind of restless energy that seemed out of place in the bar's usual calm. She didn't recognize him, but she'd seen his type before. Powerful men used to getting exactly what they wanted, exactly when they wanted it. She filed him away as table 10 high maintenance watched the wine order. She delivered the espresso, exchanged a few pleasantries with the couple at table 7, and finally made her way toward the back alcove. She approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt their conversation. "Good evening," she said, her voice low and professional. "Can I start you off with drinks? Or perhaps some water?" The man at the head of the table, the intense one, looked up. His eyes, a sharp assessing gray, locked onto hers, not at her face exactly, but past it, like he was seeing something else, something she didn't know was there. He didn't smile. He just studied her for a beat too long, his gaze flickering almost imperceptibly toward the empty piano in the corner. A strange prickle ran down her spine. She kept her expression neutral, waiting. "Water would be fine," one of the other men said quickly, breaking the odd tension. She nodded, relieved, and turned to get the water pitcher. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back. It wasn't a creepy feeling exactly, More like curiosity, but a heavy, demanding kind of curiosity that made her shoulders tense. She poured the water with steady hands, took a slow breath, and reminded herself, just another table. Just another shift. Get through it. Go home, sleep, repeat. She delivered the water, took their dinner orders, expensive cuts, specific preparations, and retreated to the safety of the service station. She watched them from the corner of her eye as she polished glasses. The intense man, she'd heard the others call him Mr. Thorne, spoke little, but when he did, the others leaned in. He had a way of cutting through noise, of making the air around him still, and every so often his gaze would drift back to the piano, and then, unsettlingly, back to her. She tried to focus on her other tables, on the rhythm of her work, but that feeling of being watched, of being seen in a way she hadn't been in years, clung to her like the damp chill outside. It made her fidget, made her wish just for a moment that she was anywhere else, that the piano wasn't there, that she hadn't spent so many years learning how to make music speak when all she wanted to do now was stay silent. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows. Inside the grand oak, the warm light and soft music felt like a fragile bubble. She didn't know it yet, but that bubble was about to pop, and the man in the back corner with his sharp eyes and restless energy was holding the pin. Her ordinary, exhausting, carefully managed life was about to tilt on its axis, all because of a piano she hadn't touched in half a decade, and a billionaire who seemed to think he could simply command her to remember. The dinner service at Table 10 unfolded like any other high-end reservation, polite, precise, and expensive. She delivered the seared scallops, the dry-aged ribeyes, the truffle-mashed potatoes, all with the quiet efficiency she'd perfected over years of reading moods and anticipating needs. The conversation at the table stayed low, punctuated by the occasional laugh that sounded more like a business transaction than genuine amusement. She kept her eyes down, her movements smooth, her presence minimal, just a shadow in black there to refill wine or clear plates, nothing more. But that feeling, the weight of being watched, didn't fade. Every time she passed the alcove, she could feel it again, like a quiet hum in the air. Mr. Thorne barely touched his food. He sipped his water, asked sharp, clipped questions about market projections, and occasionally glanced toward the piano. Not with longing, not with nostalgia, but with the focused impatience of someone who saw potential being wasted. And each time his eyes flicked from the empty bench to her, she felt a strange tightness in her chest, like her ribs were squeezing something she'd long since locked away. She told herself it was nothing. Just nerves. Rich people made her uneasy, not because of their money, but because of the way they moved through the world like it owed them something. Like rules bent around them. She'd seen it before, the snapped fingers, the entitled tone, the assumption that service meant subservience. She braced herself for it, the way you brace for a storm you know is coming. It came just as dessert was being cleared. She was wiping down a nearby table, her back to the alcove, when she heard his voice, calm, clear, and carrying just enough to cut through the low murmur of the room. Waitress. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Yes, sir. Everything all right with the meal? He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, those gray eyes steady, unreadable. Then he nodded toward the piano. You play? Her stomach dropped. Not because it was a strange question. People asked sometimes, especially when they saw her glancing that way, but because of how he asked it. Not curious, not friendly, like he already knew the answer and was testing her. I used to, she said carefully, keeping her voice neutral. A long time ago. Used to? He arched an eyebrow. That's a Steinway over there. Not a toy. You don't just used to play something like that. She felt her cheeks warm. I worked in music, yes, but that was years back. I'm staff here now. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. The other men at the table had gone quiet, watching the exchange with mild interest like spectators at a tennis match. Play something, he said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement, flat, final. She blinked. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm working. And I don't perform. You're not performing, he said, his tone sharpening just a fraction. You're playing. There's a difference. One is for show. The other is just truth, she swallowed. I appreciate that, but I really can't. My job is to serve, not entertain. A flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance? Disbelief? You're telling me you spent years training, You walk past that instrument every single night and you've never once sat down? Not even when no one's looking? She didn't answer, because the truth was she had, that one time, and the memory of it still made her feel exposed. He studied her for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. Fine, he said almost casually. Then I'll make it worth your while. Before she could respond, he turned to the man on his right, clearly his assistant, and said, Call the owner. Tell him I'm buying this place. The words landed like stones in the quiet space around the table. Even the assistant looked startled. Sir? You heard me, he said, not taking his eyes off her. Offer full price, cash, close by Monday. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew the owner, Mr. Callahan, a kind man in his 60s who'd inherited the bar from his father. He'd kept it running through recessions, through pandemics, through everything. He treated his staff like family. Losing this place would crush him. Why would you do that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because, he said, his voice dropping, almost intimate now. I hate seeing talent buried under fear, and I especially hate watching people pretend they don't miss what they loved. She shook her head, panic rising. You can't just, I can, he interrupted gently, but with steel underneath. And I will. Unless you sit down at that piano and play one song. Not for me. Not for them. He gestured to his table. For you. Play what you'd play if no one was listening. The room seemed to tilt. The soft jazz from the speakers, the clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation. It all faded into a distant buzz. All she could hear was the blood rushing in her ears and the quiet, terrifying certainty in his voice. This isn't fair, she whispered. Life rarely is, he said, but sometimes unfair things push us back to where we belong. She looked around, desperate for an out. The other diners hadn't noticed. They were too wrapped in their own worlds. Mr. Henderson was in the back, tuning his guitar for the next set. The manager was dealing with a spill near the entrance. No one was coming to save her. And if she refused, this man, this stranger with more money than sense, would actually do it. He'd buy the place, fire everyone, ruin Mr. Callahan's life, all because she wouldn't play a song. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back hard. Crying wouldn't help. Running wouldn't help. She was trapped, not by chains but by consequence. All right, she said, her voice tight. One song. That's it. A small, satisfied nod. That's all I'm asking. She walked toward the piano like she was walking to the edge of a cliff. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her hands were clammy. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel eyes on her now. Not just his, but others too. Curious glances turning into full attention as the staff noticed something unusual happening. She reached the bench. It was cool under her palms as she lowered herself onto it. The lid of the Steinway was already open, the keys gleaming under the soft spotlight. They looked foreign and familiar all at once, like meeting an old friend after a long, painful silence. She placed her hands on her lap, not touching the keys yet. Just breathing, trying to quiet the storm inside her. She could feel the weight of the room, the expectation, the curiosity, the sheer absurdity of it all. She wasn't a performer. She hadn't practiced in years. What if her fingers froze? What if she hit a wrong note and everyone laughed? What if she broke down right there in front of strangers? She closed her eyes for a second. And in that darkness, she didn't see the bar, the billionaire, the watching crowd. She saw her mother's face, pale but smiling, propped up in the hospital bed, asking her to play just a little something on the tiny keyboard she'd brought from home. She remembered how the music had filled that sterile room, how it had been the only thing that made her mother's eyes light up in those final weeks. That memory anchored her. She opened her eyes, took a slow breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note she played was soft, a single clear C. It rang out in the quiet bar, pure and simple. Then another, then a chord. She started with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opera 9, No. 2. A piece she'd learned at 16, one that had once felt like breathing. Her fingers remembered the shapes, the flow, even if her mind was screaming. But halfway through the first phrase, her left hand stumbled. A wrong note clanged out, harsh and ugly. She flinched. Her hands froze. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. She could feel the heat rising in her face, the shame flooding in. She wanted to stand up, run out the back door, disappear into the rainy night. She kept her eyes down, staring at the keys like they'd betrayed her. Her throat tightened. This was exactly why she'd stopped. Music wasn't safe. It demanded everything, your heart, your focus, your vulnerability, and gave nothing back but the risk of failure. Then from the alcove, his voice came again. Quiet but clear enough for her to hear. Not that, she looked up, startled. Not that, he repeated, leaning forward. That's what you think people want to hear. Play what you need to say. She stared at him. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not her teachers, not her mother, not even herself. They'd always talked about technique, about interpretation, about pleasing an audience. But this was different. This was permission. Not to perform, but to speak. Her hands hovered over the keys. What did she need to say? She thought of the night sitting by her mother's bedside, the silence so heavy it felt like drowning. She thought of packing up her life at Juilliard, folding her dreams into a suitcase like old clothes. She thought of the exhaustion of double shifts, the loneliness of her apartment, the way she'd learned to swallow her sadness like bitter medicine. And then, without thinking, her fingers moved. It wasn't Chopin. It wasn't anything from memory. It was something new, something old. A melody that had lived inside her for years, unplayed, unspoken. It started low and slow, a single line in the left hand like footsteps in an empty hallway. Then the right hand joined, weaving a thread of sound that was both sorrowful and strangely hopeful. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have big chords or dramatic runs. It was quiet, intimate, honest. She wasn't playing for the room anymore. She wasn't even playing for herself. She was just letting it out. The grief, the love, the quiet strength it took to keep going when everything felt broken. The music filled the space between the notes, the pauses, the breaths, the spaces where words failed. And as she played, something shifted in the room. The clinking of glasses stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. A couple at the bar turned fully toward the piano. Mr. Henderson, who'd been walking back in with his guitar, froze in the doorway, his eyes wide. Even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the pass, drawn by the sudden stillness. But she didn't notice. She was lost in the sound, in the feel of the keys under her fingers, in the release of something she'd carried for so long. The song built slowly, not with volume but with depth. It swelled like a held breath finally let go, then softened again, like a hand gently closing over a wound. She didn't know how long she played. Time didn't matter. All that mattered was the truth in her hands, the story in the notes. And when the last chord faded into silence, a soft, unresolved harmony that hung in the air like a question, the room didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. It just stayed silent. For 3 full seconds, maybe 4, no one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that feels sacred, like the whole world had leaned in to listen. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. Then another. Then the whole room, staff, guests, even the kitchen crew, rose to their feet, applauding not with wild enthusiasm but with deep, respectful awe. She kept her hands on the keys, her head bowed, tears finally spilling over, not from shame this time, from relief, from the sheer shocking weight of being heard. She didn't look at the billionaire. She didn't need to. She already knew what she'd see. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but something quieter, something human, recognition. And in that moment, sitting at the piano she'd avoided for years, surrounded by strangers who suddenly felt like witnesses to something real, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. She hadn't lost her music. It had just been waiting for her to come back. The applause didn't last long, just long enough to feel real, not staged. And then it faded into a hush that was somehow heavier than before. She kept her hands resting on the keys, not moving, not looking up. Her chest rose and fell with slow, shaky breaths. The tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving faint trails, but the feeling inside her hadn't settled. It was like a storm had passed through her, leaving everything rearranged. The room around her felt different now, not just quieter but softer, as if everyone had taken a step back out of respect. She finally lifted her head. The first thing she saw was Mr. Henderson standing near the piano, his guitar forgotten at his side. His eyes were bright and he gave her the smallest nod, just a tilt of his chin, but it meant everything. He'd been playing in bars like this for 30 years. He knew what real music sounded like, and he'd just heard it. Then her gaze drifted to the back alcove. The billionaire, Mr. Thorne, was still seated, but he wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling either. He just sat there, elbows on the table, fingers loosely interlaced, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't admiration exactly. It was more like recognition. Like he'd seen something in her that she'd forgotten was there, and now he was waiting to see what she'd do with it. She stood up slowly, smoothing her apron with trembling hands. Her legs felt unsteady, like she'd just stepped off a boat. She wanted to disappear, to slip into the kitchen, change out of her uniform, and walk home in the rain without looking back. But she couldn't, not yet. She had a job to finish. Tables needed clearing. Glasses needed washing. The night wasn't over. She walked back to her station, head down, avoiding eye contact. But people kept looking at her. Not with pity or curiosity, but with something warmer, something like gratitude. A woman at the bar mouthed, "Thank you." A man near the window gave her a small, respectful nod. Even the dishwasher, peeking out from the kitchen door, grinned and gave her a thumbs up. It was overwhelming. She wasn't used to being seen like this, not as a person who served, but as someone who gave something. Music had always been private for her, something she shared only in the safety of practice rooms or hospital rooms. To have it witnessed by strangers, to have it received like this, it felt like standing naked in daylight. Exposed, but also strangely free. She forced herself to focus. She gathered empty plates from table 10, her hands steady now. The billionaire didn't say anything as she cleared his untouched dessert. He just watched her, quiet, thoughtful. When she turned to leave, he finally spoke. "That was yours, wasn't it?" She paused. "Yes. No one's ever heard it before?" "No," he nodded slowly. It sounded like it came from somewhere deep. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just said, "Thank you," and walked away before her voice could crack. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. She moved through her tasks on autopilot, her mind racing. What had just happened? Had she really played that? In front of all those people? And why did it feel like the most honest thing she'd done in years? When the last guest left and the doors were locked, the staff gathered in the dimmed bar for the nightly cleanup. No one mentioned the piano. No one made a big deal, but the air between them was different. Lighter somehow. Mr. Callahan, the owner, came out from his office and clapped her gently on the shoulder as he passed. "You okay, kid?" he asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good," he said. That was something special. She just smiled weakly and went back to wiping down the bar. It was nearly 2 a.m. by the time she stepped out into the cold Chicago night. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick, reflecting the neon signs and streetlights like broken glass. She pulled her thin coat tighter around her and started walking toward the bus stop, her feet aching, her mind still echoing with the sound of those last chords. She didn't notice the black town car idling at the curb until it rolled slowly to a stop beside her. The back window slid down. It was him. "Need a ride?" he asked. His voice was calm, neutral, no trace of the commanding tone from earlier. She hesitated. Getting into a stranger's car, especially a billionaire's, felt like a bad idea. But something in his eyes told her this wasn't about power anymore. It was about something else. "I'm fine," she said. "The bus comes in 10 minutes. He didn't argue. Just nodded. "Fair enough," he paused. "But I'd like to talk. Tomorrow, maybe. Over coffee. No demands. No conditions." She studied his face. He looked tired. Human. Not like the man who'd threatened to buy the bar, but like someone who'd just witnessed something that moved him. "Why?" she asked. "Because that song," he said quietly. "It reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. The courage to be honest. I'd like to hear more about how you held on to yours." She didn't answer right away. The bus pulled up down the street, its headlights cutting through the fog. "I work the morning shift at the cafe on Elm," she said finally. "I'm there by 6. I'll be there at 6:15, he said. "Just coffee. 10 minutes. If you change your mind, I'll understand." The bus doors hissed open. She gave him a small nod and walked away, not looking back. But as she climbed the steps, she felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her. Not fear, not anger, but the faintest flicker of curiosity. The next morning, she woke before her alarm, staring at the ceiling. The dream had been vivid. Her mother sitting at a piano, smiling, playing a melody that turned into the one she'd played last night. She got up, made coffee, checked the bills on the counter, same as always, but everything felt different. She walked to the cafe in the pale gray light of dawn. The city was quiet, still waking up. She tied on her apron, filled the pastry case, started the espresso machine. Routine. Safe. At 6:14, the bell above the door jingled. He walked in alone, wearing a simple dark coat. No entourage, no phone in hand. He looked like any other customer, just a man needing coffee before work. He ordered a black coffee, paid in cash, and sat at a small table by the window. At 6:25, during a lull, she walked over with a refill. "You came," she said. "I said I would." She stood there holding the pot. "Why do you care?" He looked up at her, his eyes clear in the morning light. "Because I spend most of my days surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. Last night you played something that didn't care what I wanted. It just was. That's rare and valuable." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just poured the coffee. "Do you still write music?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "In my head." "I don't have a piano," he nodded. "What if you did?" She laughed softly. "I'd probably be too scared to touch it." "Why?" "Because it matters too much," she said, surprising herself with the honesty. "When you lose something you love, it's easier to pretend it never mattered. But if you go back and it's gone, that's worse than never having it at all." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't think it's gone. I think it's waiting." She looked at him, really looked. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't selling anything. He just seemed sincere. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "I want to give you something." She tensed. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," he said gently. "It's an investment. In you, in that song, in the ones you haven't written yet." She shook her head. "I can't accept money from you." "I'm not offering money," he said. "I'm offering time, space, a chance. There's a small studio downtown. Just a room with a piano, good acoustics, no distractions. I own it, barely use it. You can have it for free, as long as you need it. No strings. No expectations, just go play." She stared at him. It sounded too good to be true. And maybe it was. But the look in his eyes, it reminded her of how she'd felt last night sitting at the piano, like she was finally telling the truth. "Why?" she whispered. "Because the world needs more truth," he said. "And last night you reminded me what it sounds like." She didn't say yes right away. She told him she'd think about it. He left his coffee half finished, wrote down an address on a napkin, and walked out without another word. She kept the napkin in her pocket all day. That night, after her shift at the Grand Oak, she didn't go straight home. She walked. Past the bus stop, past her usual route toward the address on the napkin. It was in a quiet part of the loop, in a building that looked like old offices converted into artist spaces. She stood outside for 10 minutes, just looking up at the windows, her breath fogging in the cold air. She didn't go in. Not yet. But she stood there long enough to imagine it. The quiet room, the piano waiting, the space to just be. When she finally turned to leave, she felt something shift inside her. Not a decision exactly, but a possibility. A door cracked open, just a sliver. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid to look through it. She didn't go to the studio the next day. Or the day after that. She kept working her shifts, kept folding laundry, kept paying bills, kept pretending the napkin with the address wasn't tucked into the pocket of her coat, like a secret she wasn't ready to open. But every night after she locked her apartment door and turned off the lights, she'd sit on the edge of her bed and listen to the silence. And in that silence, the melody from the bar would rise up again, soft, insistent, like a voice calling her home. By the third day, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She took the bus downtown during her afternoon break, wearing her cafe uniform under a thick coat, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. The building was exactly as she remembered, old brick, tall windows, quiet. No sign out front, just a brass number on the door. She climbed the stairs slowly, her heart pounding like she was doing something wrong, even though no one had told her not to come. The door to the studio was unlocked. Inside, it was just a single room, high ceilings, wooden floors, soft light filtering through tall windows. And in the center, under a dust cover, was a piano. Not a grand like the one at the Grand O, but a well-cared-for upright, its wood warm and smooth. She walked over slowly, like approaching a sleeping animal, and lifted the cover. The keys were clean. The bench was padded. A single lamp on a nearby shelf cast a soft pool of light over the music stand, empty, waiting. She sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long time. Not playing. Just remembering the weight of them, the cool smoothness of the ivory. Then softly she pressed a single note. Middle C. It rang out clear and true in the quiet room, and just like that, the dam broke. She didn't plan what to play. She didn't think about technique or structure or whether it was good. She just let her hands move. The song from the bar came first, tentative at first, then stronger, as if it had been waiting for this moment. But then something else came too. New phrases, new feelings, things she hadn't known she was carrying. A faster section, full of restless energy, like walking city streets at night. Then a slow, aching passage that felt like missing someone you couldn't call anymore. She played for an hour, then 2. She forgot about her shift, forgot about the time, forgot about everything except the sound filling the room and the strange, quiet joy of making it. When she finally stopped, her hands were stiff. Her eyes were dry from staring so hard, but her chest felt lighter than it had in years. She went back the next day, and the next, she started bringing a notebook, scribbling down melodies that came to her in the shower or on the bus. She'd play them at the piano, tweak them, sometimes throw them away. Other times they'd grow into something bigger, something that felt like a story only she could tell. The billionaire never showed up. He didn't call. He didn't send messages. He just left the door open, and that was enough. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. Snow dusted the streets and the city moved slower, wrapped in scarves and steam from manhole covers. She kept working her jobs, mornings at the cafe, evenings at the bar. But now there was a third place she belonged, the studio. It became her sanctuary, her secret life. One afternoon, as she was leaving the studio, she found an envelope taped to the piano bench. No name, no return address, just her first name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. The note read, "The studio is yours as long as you need it. The key is for after hours. Don't lock the door behind you. Someone else might need a place to remember who they are too." She held the key in her palm. It was small, cold, real, and for the first time she didn't feel like she was borrowing someone else's kindness. She felt like she'd earned the right to be here. She started recording, not professionally, just with her phone at first, propped on the music stand. Then she borrowed a decent microphone from a friend who worked in audio. She recorded everything. The finished pieces, the messy attempts, the quiet improvisations that came when she was tired or sad or happy for no reason at all. She didn't know what she'd do with the recordings. She just knew she needed to keep them. One night, after a particularly long shift at the Grand Oak, she played a new piece, one that had been forming in her mind for days. It started with a simple left-hand pattern, steady like a heartbeat, and over it the right hand wove a melody that felt like hope after a long winter. She played it 3 times, each time a little more sure, a little more alive. When she listened back to the recording the next morning, she cried. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't, but because it sounded like her. Not the waitress, not the daughter who'd lost her mom, not the student who'd walked away. Just her, the part that had been quiet for too long. She didn't know it yet, but someone else had heard it too. A few days later, Mr. Callahan pulled her aside during her evening shift. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. "Listen," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "That man, the one from the back table, he came in today. During the day. Asked about you." Her stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "Not much," he said quickly. "Just that you work hard, you're reliable, and you've got a good heart. He didn't ask for your number or anything. Just if you were okay." She frowned. "That's it?" "Well," Mr. Callahan hesitated. "He also said he'd like to help you put your music out there. Said he knows people in the industry, but he made it clear he won't do anything unless you say it's okay." She was quiet for a long moment. The idea of sharing her music beyond the studio, beyond her phone recordings, felt terrifying. What if people didn't like it? What if they thought it was amateurish? What if it got lost in the noise of everything else? But then she thought of the silence in the bar that night. The way people had stopped talking, stopped moving just to listen. That hadn't been about skill. It had been about truth. "Tell him," she said slowly, "that if he wants to help, I'd like to record it properly. Just one song. The one I played that night. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay too." Mr. Callahan smiled. "I'll let him know." 2 weeks later, she found herself in a real recording studio. Small but professional. with soundproof walls and a grand piano that felt like coming home. The billionaire wasn't there. He'd sent a producer instead, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense energy who listened to her play the song once and said, "We're keeping that. No edits, just you and the piano." They recorded it in 3 takes. The third one was the one they used, the one where her voice cracked slightly on a high note, the one where you could hear her breathe between phrases. The producer insisted on keeping it. "That's the human part," she said. "That's what people connect with." When it was done, they called the track One Song. Simple, honest, no fancy title, no marketing spin. The billionaire arranged for it to be released quietly. No big announcement, no press tour. Just uploaded to the usual platforms with a plain black cover and her name. He didn't even put his name anywhere near it. This wasn't his project. It was hers. For the first week, nothing happened. A few listens here and there. Then, slowly, something shifted. A classical music blog picked it up. "A haunting, wordless elegy that speaks louder than words," they wrote. Then a radio station in Chicago played it during their late-night segment. Listeners called in asking, "Who is this?" Then a famous pianist shared it on social media with the caption, "This is why we play." Within a month, one song had been streamed over 1 million times. She didn't check the numbers often. She didn't want the numbers to change how she felt about the music. But she couldn't ignore the messages. Emails from strangers saying the song got them through a hard day. A nurse who played it for her patients. A teenager who said it made her pick up the piano again after quitting. One message stood out. It was from a woman whose mother had just passed. She wrote, "I played your song at her memorial. It was the only thing that didn't feel like a lie. Thank you for giving us a way to say goodbye without words." She read that message 3 times. Then she went to the studio and played for hours, not for anyone, not for anything, just because she needed to. The attention didn't change her routine. She still worked her shifts. She still took the bus. She still paid her bills one by one. But something inside her had settled. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't pretending music wasn't part of her. It was, and that was okay. One evening, as she was closing up at the Grand Oak, Mr. Henderson came over. He'd been quiet since that night, respectful of her space. "You know," he said, polishing a glass. "I've played in bars for 30 years, seen a lot of talent come and go. Most of it's flashy, loud, designed to impress. But what you did, that wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about saying something real." She looked at him. "I was just playing what I felt. That's the hardest thing to do," he said. "And the most important," she smiled. "Thanks, Mr. Henderson. Call me Frank," he said. "And if you ever need someone to listen, I'm here." She nodded, and for the first time she felt like she wasn't alone in this. The song kept spreading, not like a pop hit but like a whisper passed from person to person, quiet, persistent, real. And with every listen, every message, every quiet moment, someone shared it with someone they loved. She understood something deeper. Music wasn't just hers. It belonged to anyone who needed it, and that was enough. More than enough. She didn't know what came next. Maybe more songs, maybe a small concert, maybe just more nights in the studio, playing for the joy of it. But whatever came, she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't stop playing. Not this time. Spring came quietly to Chicago, the kind of slow thaw that creeps in unnoticed until one morning you realize the air doesn't bite anymore. She still worked her shifts, mornings at the cafe, evenings at the Grand Oak. But now there was a new rhythm to her days. After work, instead of heading straight home to collapse into bed, she'd stop by the studio. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The piano wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a friend. The success of one song hadn't turned her life upside down in the way people might expect. There were no flashing cameras, no interviews on morning shows, no sudden wealth. The billionaire had kept his word. He'd helped her share the music, then stepped back. No contracts, no pressure, no strings. Just space. And that space had given her something rare, time to grow without being watched. She'd started writing again. Not just one song, but many. Some were sad, some were light, some were angry, some were full of quiet joy. She recorded them the same way, honestly, simply, and slowly, quietly, they found their way into the world. A small classical label reached out, not with a big offer, but with respect. They wanted to release an album. Just piano, just her. No gimmicks. She said yes. The album was called One Song, named after the piece that started it all. It came out on a rainy Tuesday in April. She didn't throw a party. She didn't post about it online. She just went to work like any other day. But that night when she walked into the Grand Oak, the staff had taped a small printed review to the service station. It was from a respected music magazine, a voice that speaks without words, full of grace, grief, and quiet resilience. This isn't just music, it's a gift. She folded the paper carefully and put it in her pocket. A week later, she got a call. Not from a label, not from a promoter, but from a community center on the South Side. They'd heard her music. They worked with kids who'd lost parents, who'd faced hard things too young. Would she be willing to come play just once? Not a concert, just to share? She said yes. The room was small, filled with mismatched chairs and kids who looked at her with wary curiosity. She didn't introduce herself with a title or a bio. She just sat at the old upright piano in the corner and played. Not her most polished pieces, just the ones that felt true. When she finished, a girl in the front row, maybe 10 years old, raised her hand. "Did you write that because you were sad?" She nodded. "Yes, but also because I hoped things could get better." The girl thought for a moment. "My mom's gone too." She didn't say anything fancy. She just said, "I know. And it's okay to miss her. Music helps me remember her without hurting so much." The girl smiled, a small, real smile, and that was enough. After that, she started visiting more places like it. Schools, shelters, hospitals. Never for money. Never for attention. Just because she remembered what it felt like to carry grief in silence. And she knew music could be a hand reaching out in the dark. One afternoon, as she was leaving the studio, she saw him. The billionaire stood near the building's entrance, hands in his coat pockets, looking up at the windows like he was remembering something. He turned when he heard her footsteps and gave her a small nod. "You're still coming," he said. "Every day," she replied. He didn't ask about the album, didn't mention the reviews or the streams. Instead, he said, "I heard you've been playing for kids." She nodded. "They listen differently. Like they really hear it." "They do," he said, "because they haven't learned to pretend yet." They stood in silence for a moment, the city humming around them. "I never thanked you," she said finally. "You don't need to." "I do," she insisted. "You didn't just give me a piano. You gave me back my voice, and you didn't ask for anything in return." He looked at her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "I got something in return," he said. "I got to remember that not everything valuable can be bought. Sometimes it's just given, and that's worth more." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just smiled. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "I've been thinking," he said. "There are a lot of people like you out there. Talented, quiet, carrying something heavy. They just need a place to breathe, a piano, a chance." She took the envelope, confused. "It's a proposal," he said. "Not for you. For others. I want to fund a program. Small grants for artists who've had to step away from their craft because of life. Medical bills, family crises, whatever it is. And I want to turn spaces like this one," he gestured to the building, "into open studios. Free to use. No auditions. No judgments. Just walk in, play, and leave the door open for the next person." Her eyes filled with tears. That's incredible. "But," he said, holding up a finger, "there's one condition." She tensed. "What? You help run it?" "Not as a figurehead. As a guide. Someone who's been there. Who knows what it feels like to come back." She looked down at the envelope, then back at him. "Why me?" "Because you didn't just take the chance," he said. "You paid it forward. That's the kind of heart this needs." She thought about it. Really thought. This wasn't about fame. It wasn't about money. It was about making sure no one else had to bury their music the way she had. "Okay," she said, "but on one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "Name it. The Grand Oak stays open. All the staff keep their jobs. And that piano in the corner? It stays open to anyone who wants to play, even if they're just passing through." He smiled, a real quiet smile. "Deal." They shook hands right there on the sidewalk. Two people who'd started as strangers and ended up building something that mattered. Months later, the first open-key studio opened in a converted warehouse on the west side. It had 3 pianos, a few guitars, a drum kit, and a sign on the door that read, "Play, listen, leave the door open." She was there every Tuesday, not to perform, but to welcome, to listen. To remind people that music wasn't about perfection, It was about honesty. And then came the night of her first official concert. It wasn't in a grand hall. It was in a small theater downtown, the kind with worn velvet seats and a stage that felt close enough to touch. Tickets sold out in hours, not because of hype, but because people wanted to hear the music live, to feel that same quiet truth in person. She walked onto the stage in a simple black dress, no fanfare, no spotlight, just her and the piano. The audience was silent before she even played a note. They knew what to expect. They'd been waiting. She played the whole album, each piece a chapter of her journey. And when she reached the final song, the one she'd written just weeks before, she paused. The notes were gentle, hopeful, like dawn after a long night. When the last chord faded, the room didn't erupt in cheers. It held its breath. Then slowly people began to stand. Not out of obligation, but out of respect. And in the back row near the exit, he sat. Not clapping loudly, not drawing attention, just watching. With that same quiet look he'd had that first night at the bar. When their eyes met across the room, he gave her the smallest nod. After the concert, she didn't go to an after-party. She went home. She made tea, sat by her window, and looked out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with messages. Congratulations, thank yous, requests for more music. She read them all, but she didn't reply right away. Instead, she opened the plastic bin under her bed, the one with her old sheet music and concert programs. For the first time in years, she took it out. She didn't cry. She just flipped through the pages, smiling at the scribbles in the margins, the coffee stains, the memories tucked between the notes. She wasn't the same person who'd packed those pages away. But she was still her, just more whole. The next morning, she went to the cafe as usual. The regulars greeted her like always. No one treated her differently, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Later that week, she visited her mother's grave. She didn't bring flowers. She brought a small portable speaker. She played one song softly, the notes drifting into the quiet cemetery air. "I'm still playing, Mom," she whispered, "and I think you'd be proud." Back at the Grand Oak that evening, Mr. Henderson was tuning the Steinway. He saw her come in and patted the bench beside him. "Play something?" he asked. She smiled. "Not tonight, but soon." She walked to her station, tied on her apron, and picked up her tray. The piano sat silent in the corner, waiting. Not just for her, but for whoever needed it next. And somewhere in the city, a kid was walking into an open-key studio for the first time, fingers hovering over the keys, heart pounding with the same mix of fear and hope she'd once felt. The music wasn't hers alone anymore. It belonged to everyone who dared to play. There was no grand finale, no dramatic curtain call, just life unfolding in small, steady moments like rain filling a dry riverbed. After the concert, things didn't slow down so much as settle into a new kind of rhythm. She still wore her black apron at the Grand Oak, still remembered how Mr. Callahan took his coffee, 2 sugars, splash of cream, still laughed with the dishwasher over burnt toast in the staff kitchen. But now when she passed the piano, she didn't look away. Sometimes, if the bar was quiet and Mr. Henderson was on break, she'd sit for 5 minutes and play a few lines of something new, just enough to keep the conversation going between her and the keys. The open key program grew faster than anyone expected. Not because of flashy ads or big announcements, but because word spread the old-fashioned way, through teachers, community centers, late-night conversations between friends who'd lost their way and were looking for a path back. The first studio in the Westside warehouse became 2, then 3, each in a different neighborhood, each with the same simple rule. Walk in, play, leave the door open. She visited them all, not as a boss, but as a listener. She'd sit in the corner with a notebook, not taking names or judging skill, just watching how music changed people's shoulders, their breathing, the way they held their hands. One rainy Thursday, she walked into the newest location, a converted storefront in a neighborhood hit hard by factory closures. Inside, a teenager with headphones around his neck was tentatively pressing keys on a slightly out-of-tune upright. He stopped when he saw her. "I'm not supposed to be here," he mumbled, stepping back. "Why not?" she asked, leaning against the wall. "My mom says I'm wasting time. I should be looking for a job," she nodded. "Did you play before?" "Yeah, in middle school. But we couldn't afford lessons after. Stuff happened." She didn't ask what stuff meant. She didn't need to. She'd seen that look before, the mix of shame and longing. "Play something now," she said gently. "Just for you." He hesitated, then sat back down. His fingers were stiff at first, but soon they found a simple blues progression, rough but real. When he finished, he looked up, almost defiant. "That wasn't perfect," she said. He frowned. "No, but it was honest," she added. "And that's what matters here." He stayed another hour that day, and the next, that was how it worked. Not with fanfare, but with quiet persistence. People came broken, tired, unsure, and left a little lighter, not because their problems vanished, but because they'd remembered they still had a voice. The billionaire, she still didn't know what to call him, so she just thought of him as the man from the bar, kept his distance as promised. But every few weeks a new envelope would appear at the studio. Sometimes it was a check to cover piano tunings. Sometimes it was a note, heard about the teen in Englewood. Keep going. Once it was a photo of a brand new open key space opening in Detroit, with a line scribbled on the back. "Your idea." Your heart spreading. She never replied. She didn't need to. Their understanding lived in the work itself. Her own music kept growing too. The second album came together slowly, like a garden tended in spare moments. This one had more light in it, less grief, more gratitude. She recorded it in the same small studio where it all began, just her and the upright piano, the same one she'd first played after so many years of silence. When it was finished, she didn't send it to labels. She released it herself online with a simple message, for anyone who's trying to come back. It didn't top charts. It didn't need to. But teachers used it in classrooms. Therapists played it during sessions. A hospice nurse wrote to say she played it for patients in their final hours. And families told her it made the room feel peaceful, like love made sound. One afternoon, while sorting mail at the open key office, a tiny room above the original studio, she found a letter with no return address. Inside was a handmade card drawn in crayon, a piano, a stick figure playing it. Above it, in careful printing, "Thank you for letting me play. I miss my dad, but the music helps." There was no name, just a heart in the corner. She taped it to the wall above her desk, right next to the old concert program from her Juilliard days. Past and present side by side. At the Grand Oak, things changed too, but gently. Mr. Callahan, inspired by what she'd built, started letting local students play the Steinway on slow nights. No auditions. Just show up, sign your name, and play for 20 minutes. Some were shaky, some were brilliant. All were welcome. The bar became more than a place to drink. It became a place to listen, to remember that beauty could show up in the most ordinary corners. She still served drinks, but now guests would sometimes ask, "Is that you?" "The pianist?" She'd smile and say, "I play sometimes," and leave it at that. She didn't want to be a spectacle. She just wanted to be a person who happened to make music, and serve coffee and fold laundry, and pay bills like everyone else. One evening, during a lull, Mr. Henderson handed her a cup of tea and sat beside her at the bar. "You know," he said, stirring his coffee, "I used to think talent was about how fast you could play, or how many notes you could fit in a measure. But watching you, I realized it's about how much truth you can fit in a single note." She looked at him, touched. "I'm still learning that." "We all are," he said. "But you reminded us." Later that night, as she was wiping down tables, a man in his 60s approached her. He looked nervous, twisting his hat in his hands. "I heard you play that night," he said quietly. "Years ago." "I was at the bar with my wife. She passed last winter." She stopped cleaning. "I'm so sorry," he nodded. "After she died, I couldn't listen to music. It hurt too much. But then I heard your song on the radio, and for the first time it didn't hurt. It felt like..." She was still with me, just in a different way. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you for telling me." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "I started writing again. Little poems. I never did before. But your music, it made me feel like I could say things I'd been holding in." He handed her the notebook. She opened it. The pages were filled with short, tender lines about morning light, empty chairs, and the sound of rain. "I don't expect you to read it all," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know." She closed the notebook gently and handed it back. "Keep writing," she said. "The world needs your voice too." He smiled, tucked the notebook away, and walked out into the night. Moments like that became her real reward. Not streams or sales, but the quiet ripples of connection. Music wasn't a performance anymore. It was a bridge. One Saturday morning, she visited the first open-key studio early, before anyone else arrived. She wanted to tune the piano herself, a skill she'd picked up out of necessity. As she worked, adjusting the pins with careful turns, she thought about how far she'd come. Not in fame or fortune, but in peace. She no longer flinched at the thought of her past. She carried it gently, like a well-worn book she could open when she needed to. Later that day, she got a call from the community center on the south side. The girl who'd asked about her mom, the 10-year-old with the quiet voice, had written a song. Would she come hear it? She went that afternoon. The girl played a simple melody on a keyboard, her fingers small but sure. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of love. Afterward, the girl looked up. Do you think it's good enough? She knelt beside her. It's not about good enough, it's about true enough. And yours is. The girl beamed. On the bus ride home, she watched the city pass by. The storefronts, the parks, the people hurrying under umbrellas. She thought about all the hidden stories in those faces, all the songs no one had ever heard, and she felt a deep, quiet joy, not because she'd made it, but because she'd helped make space for others to find their way back to themselves. That night, she dreamed of her mother again. But this time, they were both at the piano playing together, her mother humming along, her hands light on the keys, laughing at a wrong note. When she woke, she didn't feel sad. She felt full. A few weeks later, the man from the bar showed up at the Grand Oak, not in the back alcove, but at the bar itself during a quiet Tuesday evening. He ordered a soda water, no lime. She served him without fanfare. You look tired, he said. Long week, she replied. He nodded. The Detroit studio needs a soundproof wall. I approved the funds this morning. Thank you, he paused. You've built something real. It's not mine, she said. It's everyone's, he smiled faintly. Maybe. But you lit the match. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then he said, I used to think success was about building something no one could ignore. Now I think it's about building something that helps people feel seen. She looked at him, really looked. The arrogance she'd sensed that first night was gone, replaced by something humbler, deeper. You changed too, she said. Music does that, he replied. Even to billionaires, she laughed softly. Especially to billionaires. He left before the dinner rush, tipping well as always. But this time he left something else on the bar, a small keychain with a tiny piano charm. She picked it up, smiled, and tucked it into her apron pocket. Life went on. Seasons turned. Snow fell, melted, bloomed into spring again. She kept working, kept playing, kept listening. The open key program expanded to 5 cities. She turned down offers to tour, to do interviews, to monetize her brand. She didn't want a brand. She wanted a legacy of kindness, of open doors. And every now and then, on a quiet night at the Grand Oak, she'd sit at the Steinway and play just one song, the one that started it all. Not for the crowd, not for memory, but because it still needed to be said. And in that moment, with the room hushed and the keys warm under her fingers, she knew. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Not famous, not forgotten, just free.